Hi everybody, and welcome to week 6 of Faerie Awakening, and I'm really glad to be here with you all, and I hope you're all doing really well. I cannot believe we're in week 6 already. I'm not quite sure how this has happened, and there's so much more Faerie to go through. I was like, we've got 2 more weeks, but there's so much more to do. But I feel like this is, again, an awakening, isn't it? And the course so far, I hope you have found, has been an awakening experience with your connection with fairies, or a deepening experience with your connection with fairies. And I feel like we go on for weeks and weeks and weeks, and in many ways I'd really love to go on for weeks and weeks, but I also feel that maybe we take on what we've learned, we take on what's come up over this last few weeks and the next couple of weeks, and we maybe sit with that and work with that for a while before we go on to that next stage of working through more fairy magic. But I'm talking about things like it's over, and it really isn't. We've got so much more over the next couple of weeks. I'm really packing it full for you as we approach. Well, here in the Northern Hemisphere, we're almost in December, so we're going through to the winter solstice, not yet, but within the next sort of 3 or 4 weeks. And also in the Southern Hemisphere, you'll be heading up to the summer solstice, so you'll have the longest day and we'll have the shortest day. But what I would love to talk about this week, and what is the main topic of this week's work, of week 6 of Faerie Awakening, is about the fairy queens and the fairy kings. This week we're going deep into the courts of the fairy queens and the fairy kings, and we're going to find our own guides, find our own fairy friends, mentors and connections within the fairy royalty. So I put this near the end of the course because I felt like it would be really nice to deepen our connection, our understanding of fairy, get used to journeying into fairy as well, before we really go into some of the hearts of fairy and go into one of the most respected and powerful energies that we can work with in the fairy realm, and that's the fairy queens themselves and the fairy kings. So the first part of the week we're looking at fairy queens, and the second part of the week we're looking at the fairy kings. So ladies first for the beginning of the week, and then we'll look at the wild fairy kings for the last part of this week. So the aim this week isn't to necessarily having to find a fairy queen and king that you wish to connect with on a deeper level, but to open the gateway to understanding the different fairy royalty, what they are, where they come from, how you can connect with them, and maybe starting to see which direction you're being drawn in. Is there a particular fairy queen that is speaking to you, calling to you? Are you interested in a particular folklore or mythology or time of the year? Are you a winter person, or are you a summer person, or a spring and autumn person? Because we have different fairy queens that connect with the different seasons. So if any of you lovely people have done my Goddess Awakening course, you know one of the goddess archetypes we look at is the Queen Goddess. And you'll remember that in that Queen Goddess week we did discuss that a lot of the fairy queens are remnants and aspects of ancient goddesses. So when we look at the fairy queens, it's hard to put them in a box, and they probably wouldn't let us anyway. Some fairy queens are from actual real mythological royalty, real royalty with their own myths that have turned them into fairy queens. We'll go into that. Some are from fairy tales, which we'll probably find that before that they are in myths and legends as goddesses and gods, and many of them are the goddesses and gods of the land in a different form. Now, the goddesses and the gods of our land, wherever land you are in, are, and particularly would have been so revered and so respected and so part of our everyday life and respect. It would have been very hard to get rid of them totally. Cleverly, a lot of the fairy queens have been given tales of, for example, the Snow Queen in The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe, and other fairy tales as well. But the Snow Queen is given the role as someone that steals children and is evil and cold. And that really isn't the case. However, if you tell those stories enough, people might forget the truth of these goddesses and these fairy queens, and remember only the stories and the fear. Oh, that's, that's an evil woman. A lot of fairy queens come from goddesses who really work with life, death and rebirth. So it was very easy in a way to weave the fear of death in with the fairy queens and take away her majesty, her powers to take life and to give it back, and to take those souls to a place of rest and healing and rejuvenation. Because as Christianity came along and as things shifted in the world, death became very different from how our ancestors may have seen death. So a lot of fairy queens. I'm thinking of the Snow Queen here as one example. I've got a video on my YouTube channel about the Snow Queen as well if you want to go and check it out. But the Snow Queen is based on Hulda, and there's a Germanic goddess, or Frau Holle is another name for her. And there's a lot of myths about her, but we take away this kind of child killing and nasty woman, and we go to the beauty of snow, the beauty of winter, and the aspect of winter is death and rebirth. And there's a great tale, a bit like Odin and Gwyn at Neath on the Wild Hunt, where Frau Holle or Hulda goes across the sky, often on a carriage drawn by goose, or literally flying on a goose over the night sky, and shaking her blankets, making snow fall all over the land. Now, I'd love to see some snow, to be honest. I've not seen snow for years, and I would love to have this winter solstice to be a magical one, where we can imagine Frau Holle and Hulda and the Snow Queen glistening in the perfect snowflakes. But I could be there in my mind and my heart, even if we don't have the snow. And this is one of her aspects. She goes across the land, so maybe going along the ley lines or following sacred pathways across the sky, flying and bringing about winter. She also is the origin of the Witch in the Well kind of fairy tale and story, because her domain where she lived access point was a well. And because she's a fairy queen, and because she works with taking the souls of the dead and taking them to a place of rest and rebirth, her access point to her domain was a well, and she went to a magical lake where the souls rested or were being reborn. And of course that's been taken into some evil thing, when it really was a very powerful, beautiful tale and beautiful belief, where water is the conduit between the worlds, and water is a place where emotions and souls can be taken from one space to the other, so the underworld, and taken down into a place where those souls could rest. So if we look about it in that way, we can see the origins of lots of maybe scary or not so nice tales being actually coming from a place of absolute power and beauty, and a very important role these fairy queens played. So we have also fairy queens like Morgan Le Fay. Now, she's a really interesting character. So it's again, as I said, it would be a bit strange to kind of define where some of these characters come from, because you'll feel, maybe some of you will feel, Morgan Le Fay, is she a fictional character? Does that actually matter? Really, it really doesn't. If you believe something, or if you connect with something, it has a reality on some level. So if it's if it is a fairy tale character that you don't know any myth about, that you feel very drawn to, don't discount that, because there's no obvious myth. The fairies speak to us in ways which we can understand, and which really mean something to us. So you have Morgan Le Fay, obviously in Arthurian legend, the half-sister of King Arthur, and Arthur plays a lot of roles in fairy lore as well. He's been weaved into a lot of fairy lore, and so does Guinevere and Nimue, the Lady of the Lake. But back to Morgan for a minute. She has a really fascinating story, and of course she's been made out as the baddie in a lot of modern takes, or a lot of ways we see the myth. But she was a goddess of magic and power, and yes, it's not all about the light side, is it? It's not all about fluff and glitter, though we do like fluff and glitter. It's also Morgan Le Fay really works with the death and rebirth aspects as well, and the magic and the power of the dark goddess. So Morgan Le Fay can be linked to the Morrigan, the Irish Morrigan. She's also, Morgan means from the sea. There's a lot of watery links there again. So you have this oceanic watery fairy queen, transmuting and going between the realms and taking life and transforming life. So you can see links here with some of these fairy queens. But Morgan Le Fay is a goddess and fairy queen of magic, so tapping into our own magic, but also, yes, about that life and death and rebirth energy as well. So a lot of these fairy queens have that energy. Morrigan, there's a lot of videos on my channel about the Morrigan. She's a goddess of sex, of death, of battle, of the fertility of the land and the transformation of the earth, and so many other things. There's so many aspects of the Morrigan. But what I like is, we can think about the fairy queens being diminutive or the remnants of the goddesses, but I actually see them as another aspect of the goddess, because a fairy queen energy for me is very specific and it feels different to other aspects of the goddess, and no less powerful and no less beautiful. In fact, in some ways exceptionally beautiful and deeply, deeply magical. So you can research Morgan Le Fay as an aspect of the Morrigan if you wish, if that's how that works for you. Or you can connect with Morgan Le Fay through the Arthurian myths, but maybe take some of the, again, like all these fairy tales, I'm not saying it's all, all shiny and light, but some of the judgments on these characters in the stories, maybe take with a pinch of salt. These are powerful goddesses of transformation, of life and death and healing. And obviously Morgan was one of the 9 women, and 9 is a very sacred number to the Morrigan as well, who took Arthur's body across to Avalon on the barge to be healed or to be reborn. So a powerful healer, and they're going across that water into the next life or the next realm. I mentioned the Lady of the Lake as well. Again, we have water appearing, initiating Arthur, challenging Arthur in some ways, and using that water as a place to come between the worlds. So you might want to look at the Lady of the Lake as well. There's so many fairy queens. I mean, what do you think when you think of fairy queens? What is the image that comes to your mind? It may be Galadriel from Lord of the Rings. Now, she's an excellent example of an idea of a fairy queen, because she has that light, but also that shade, as well in the films. Beautiful energy and very regal and very powerful and very ancient, but also kind of have those fallible ways, which the fairies and the queens, they're not meant to be perfect. They've got their powers and their weaknesses, maybe. The Queen of Elfame is another name for the Queen of Faerie, the Queen of Elfland. And also you have Una, who you may remember comes up in fairy tales and films, but Una is a very powerful fairy queen. I mentioned one of the original fairy queen goddesses in Ireland. So we have so many to research. I would just say in the meditations or in your journeys this week, see who pops up, because there's so many different goddesses. Hecate, Diana, these 2 goddesses also have been made into fairy queens in different poems and different plays. So if you're interested in Hecate, you may find that working as her aspect of a fairy queen can be very, very powerful. So why would you want to work with the fairy queens? And there are plenty more than the ones I've just mentioned. There'll be more about them in the sheets, obviously. But why would you want to work with the fairy queens? Because it's the highest and most powerful and maybe the wisest energy in fairy. So that's pretty good, isn't it? And they'll be there as an absolute friend, mentor, ally, and beautiful guide if we wish them to be, and if we respect them and wish to work and connect with them. So we have our fairy guides, and they're our friends and our allies and our companions on our journey. But with the connection with the fairy queen, we are going to go on a deeper level of empowerment, of self-discovery, of really tuning into our own sovereignty, because the queen energy is all about taking our power and really working with our own power. And it depends in which way right now that's going to be right for you. There's fairy queens who will be able to help us with our healing techniques. Maybe that'd be Morgan Le Fay for you. How can I also forget to say that we've got Queen Mab, who is going to really star in the meditation this week. Mab, Maeve, however you want to say it. she's based on an actual character, a legendary queen who is an insatiable lust for men, but also was meant to be a friend of the fairies, very much a friend of the fairies, who taught her magic. And she was involved in battles, and she's an amazing warrior queen. Also, there's links from Mab to Morrigan as well, Maeve. There's so much there. And Maeve of Connaught, that's, she's an Irish fairy queen, and her battles are more of sorcery and magic and wit rather than brute force. And she's a very fascinating character, but either she has been aligned with a fairy queen and that myth has moved forward, or she is that fairy queen because she has been transformed into a very powerful. Mab is often thought of as the one of the main fairy queens, and she is someone that's come from a real character. So that's really fascinating. But I feel like with fairy queens, lots of different threads can be brought into a myth. So it could be about a real person and about their fairy energy and lots of different things coming into that. But Queen Mab is a very interesting and powerful fairy queen to look into. Titania from Shakespeare's A Midsummer Night's Dream is based on Queen Mab, but Titania in herself is a fairy queen that you can connect with and research and work with. Again, you will maybe feel absolutely drawn to a particular fairy queen, or you may have already experienced this, or you will over the next week or so find that a fairy queen is really, really drawn to you. And it's a beautiful and powerful connection. It's why we've done it, as I said, a little bit later in the course, because I wanted us all to be prepared, really, and to be really more at home connecting with fairies and fairy energy before we go into connecting with the fairy queen, so we know what we're doing a bit more and we can make the most out of this experience. And if respected and honoured, this connection and friendship can be so powerful and life-altering, life-affirming, and can really help us maybe find our own power, move forward with things we've felt blocked on, have some absolutely wonderful healing, and bless us with many gifts as we work with them as well. They may be wanting to give us messages or share things with us as well. So the Fairy Queen connection and the Fairy King connection later in the week is a truly, truly powerful one for us. I mean, with the Fairy King connection, we're going to have a little bit more about that on Thursday, and you have the likes of Gwyn ap Neath with the Fairy Kings. I love Gwyn ap Neath living in Glastonbury, and the connection with the White Spring and the Tor and Gwyn ap Neath as a gateway to the underworld. So yet again we have water and the underworld being that conduit, being that connection. I don't know if you've had the chance to go, if you've been to Glastonbury, or to check out the White Spring. It is one of the most powerful spots for me here. And at the back, as you walk in, there is this shrine to Gwyn ap Neath, and there's also this sense of a gateway into the Tor. Not a physical, actual gateway, but an energetic gateway, and it's hinted at with gates around there as well. And every time I go there and journey and meditate, I'll just close my eyes, I am taken into that Tor. I'm in there on that journey with Gwyn ap Neath, and it is really something. And it's, you know, when we say fairy, I think as we've realised in this course so far, it isn't just about flowers, and though flowers are amazing, and it is about flowers too, but you know what I mean, it's not just about this lighter side, it is about this powerful force of the earth in all the earth's light and shade, in all the depths of the soul. Every human emotion and every powerful energy is an aspect of fairy. So we don't go there just for escapism, we go there to deal with our deep stuff, to unlock things in the subconscious to understand ourselves on a deeper level. And this is what we're going to do with the Fairy Kings and Queens this week. It's a key to unlocking ourselves, our power, our beauty, our wisdom in such a deeper way. So I'm really excited about this week. And I can't wait to see which Fairy Kings and Fairy Queens connect with you. Other Fairy Kings, you've got Oberon as well from Midsummer Night's Dream. We've got lots of other Fairy Queens and Kings that we're going to talk about in the worksheets. I won't go on about all of them now, but there's a lot of Fairy Kings and Queens coming through in this week's worksheets. And it's going to be really fun to learn all about them. And I love connecting with different energies. It's for any of you who work with goddesses or other spiritual paths, there's just something different when we connect with fairy queens and kings, who are alike to goddesses in so many ways, but take us on a slightly different journey into a different place, into the heart of nature, into the heart of ourselves. So it's really, really beautiful. Also, as I mentioned just a second ago, every emotion and powerful energy that we can express and we can be comes through in our fairy queen and fairy king journey, and it may heighten any emotions you already have. So connecting with your fairy king and queen, it can really heighten and empower those emotions. So if you are feeling a little bit overwhelmed emotionally this week, or when you do work with your fairy king and queen, don't panic. Don't panic, Mr. Mannering, and also don't push yourself. This is probably, maybe not straight away, but maybe straight away, going to shift some huge things for us and allow some powerful forces to work with us. So it may be overwhelming. You may feel, wow, I didn't realise I felt so emotional, or I didn't realise I felt so upset today, or so over the moon today, or so sexual today, because the fairy queens and the fairy kings for really exemplify that sexual energy. It's a story of each fairy king, fairy queen. They're usually pretty sexual creatures, and it can be something about really unlocking our own sexual creative power within ourselves as well. So I'll leave it there. I'm going to share with you much more in the sheet, and there's going to be a meditation as always later in the week. I hope that you have a wonderful and powerful connection to your fairy king and queen. You may want to adjust your altar to work with, connect, or attract the energy of a fairy queen. So an example would be let's show it you. Let's go and get it. If it's a snow queen energy that you want to work with, maybe a snow globe. And this is a lovely thing that I bought fairly recently. Excuse me for wandering around, but it's a lovely energy, a lovely snow globe that I bought recently, and I'm absolutely in love with it. I haven't shown, this is a very special thing to me. So maybe if you're working with, and it kind of combines a few very, very sacred and powerful things for me, and plus I've always loved snow globes. So perhaps if it's, for example, as I said, if it is a snow queen that you're working with, then a snow globe, some fairy frosty lights, something that resembles ice and snow and a frosty feel to your altar could be what you're bringing in. If it's the Queen Mab, maybe this is about the summer and the flowers and the life force. And if your fairy queen is more about maybe herbal and healing and Morgan Le Fay, those deep alchemy and transformations, and Morgan Le Fay is often linked to glass debris in the Torah as well. So you may want to put an apple on your altar, or some herbal remedies, or some things that you're working with in that way. It's your journey, it's up to you. A green apple, you may want to put some of the white spring water, or something again a bit like this on your altar. It's completely up to you, it's completely your journey, and again, there's no pressure to decide this week which fairy queen and king you would like to connect with on a deeper level, but you may find that this week is a gateway to finding that queen and king, ally and friend who you can really work with and find out about and help each other over the next few weeks, months, or the rest of your life. So thank you for watching, thank you for being an awesome group, and I'm loving all your updates and loving all your connections, and I really hope you have a great week, and I'll see you all really soon. Bye!